subscribe the channel and hit the bell icon for more interesting and bone-chilling stories.
I had been working late at the office, trying to wrap up a big project before the weekend. As I stepped out of the building, I realized that I had missed the last bus home. It was already past midnight, and I was stranded in the middle of downtown with no way to get home. I debated calling a taxi, but I knew that it would cost me an arm and a leg to get back to my apartment. So, I decided to walk. It was a long way, but I figured that I could make it home in a few hours if I kept a brisk pace. As I walked, the streets grew darker and quieter. The only sounds were the occasional distant car and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how alone I was. Anyone could be lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on an unsuspecting passerby. After what felt like hours of walking, I came across an old, run-down bus stop. To my surprise, there was a bus parked at the stop. Relief flooded through me as I realized that I wouldn't have to walk the rest of the way home. I approached the bus and climbed aboard. The bus driver, an elderly man with a kind face, greeted me with a smile. "Where are you headed?" he asked. I told him my address, and he nodded. "No problem. We'll get you home safe and sound." As the bus pulled away from the stop, I settled into my seat and closed my eyes. I was exhausted from the long day at work, and I figured that I could catch a quick nap before we arrived at my stop. But as the bus drove on, I began to feel uneasy. The streets we were traveling down were unfamiliar to me, and the buildings and houses we passed were old and run down. It was as if we were driving through a ghost town. I looked around the bus and saw that there were other passengers on board. They all looked strange to me, with blank expressions and strange mannerisms. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that something was not right. We drove on for what felt like hours, passing through dark forests and fields. The other passengers on the bus were eerily quiet, and I felt as if they were all watching me. I tried to ignore them and focus on getting home, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Eventually, the bus pulled up in front of an old, abandoned building. The driver turned to me and said, "This is your stop." Confused, I looked out the window and saw that we were in the middle of nowhere. There were no familiar landmarks, no signs of civilization. I turned to the driver and said, "This isn't my stop. I told you my address." The driver didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the other passengers on the bus and said, "It's time." That's when I realized that something was seriously wrong. The other passengers began to move towards me, their blank expressions turning into sinister grins. I tried to push past them and get off the bus, but they were too strong. They held me down as the driver climbed out of his seat and approached me. "You shouldn't have gotten on this bus," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "Now you're stuck here with us." I struggled against the other passengers, but they were too strong. They held me down as the driver pulled out a strange device and began to attach it to my head. I felt a surge of electricity run through my body, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a dark room, chained to a wall. The other passengers were there with me, their eyes glowing in the darkness. I realized that I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, and that I might never escape. As the hours turned into days, I began to lose track of time. I was fed scraps of food and given water, but I never saw daylight. I was trapped in this dark, twisted world with no hope of escape. Sometimes I could hear the other passengers whispering to each other in a language I didn't understand. They would look at me with their glowing eyes and grin, as if they were waiting for something. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize that I might never leave this place alive. Just then, I woke up from my sleep, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat up, drenched in sweat, and took a moment to catch my breath. Relief washed over me as I realized it was all just a nightmare, a terrifying dream that felt all too real. I looked around my familiar bedroom, taking in the comforting sights and sounds of my own apartment. The soft glow of the nightlight in the corner, the gentle hum of the air conditioner, and the familiar creaks of the floorboards reassured me that I was safe and sound. A sense of gratitude washed over me as I realized that I was back in the real world, away from the horrors of that twisted nightmare. I couldn't shake off the lingering unease, but I knew it was just a figment of my imagination, a creation of my subconscious mind. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It was just a dream, I repeated to myself. But the vividness of it, the sense of dread and captivity, still lingered in my mind. Determined to shake off the remnants of the nightmare, I got out of bed and splashed some water on my face. The cool sensation helped ground me in reality, reminding me that I was awake and in control. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I was taken aback by what I saw. There, on my face, were faint but distinct scars, evidence of the struggle I had endured in my nightmare. The realization sent a chill down my spine, as if the nightmare had left its mark on me, even in the waking world.